Our disability is our greatest strength. It gives us the supervision to see the issues facing humanity from a more inclusive perspective and the grit to fight back against all odds. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the More Than Walking Video podcast discussion. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the podcast where people of all abilities gather to discuss pressing issues that affect the disability community and their implications for the world at large. We're your host. I am Corey Pheez Lee, C4 complete quadriplegic since 2005.
And I'm Jonathan Sigworth, C7 complete quadriplegic since 2006, both of us hailing from the great state of Connecticut.
We are recording this on Thursday, the 3rd of July, 2025, and in a little bit, we'll be discussing food assistance, the choice to end hunger.
As always, Super Adaptables this year is made possible in part by a grant from the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center. The information provided and opinions expressed in these podcasts do not necessarily reflect the views of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. For more information about the Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center, visit www.christopherreeve.org. Also, I should note that the views expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of More Than Walking either, but belong to us as individual speakers.
Yeah, man, this is such a good topic to touch on with the recent current events, which I know we'll be talking about a little bit later in the podcast. But, I just wanted to start off with, talking about Oliver Twist. It was a 19th century novel written by Charles Dickens. It's a story about an orphan boy who suffers a life of abandonment, rejection, poverty, and starvation. He is parentless, forced to be a child laborer during a time when many children his age had no other options. In one of the most famous scenes depicted in both the novel and movies, Oliver is chosen by some of the other orphans to request more gruel, which was like a hodgepodge of oats and what have you. Oliver then bravely gets up and says to Mr. Bumble, who's the antagonist in the story and who is very heavyset, overweight, and it's this depiction and contrast between those who have plenty, those who have less. He says, "Please, sir, I want some more."
Gruel. I love some oatmeal, but Mr. Bumble's definitely eating too much of it. This request for more food is a reflection of what many children, including adults, encounter daily, not only in the United States, but around the world. This tale of hunger is a problem that can be linked to last month's topic, where we covered accessible and affordable housing, which from an affordability standpoint can stem from low wages, of course. And as a result, some serious consequences and repercussions follow, like homelessness, and often what accompanies homelessness is food insecurity. And much like the character Oliver Twist, millions are experiencing both.
Exactly. And so this month, our focus will be on food assistance programs. An invaluable thing that the government and states offer, benefits such as SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or WIC, which is a special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children, are vital in providing nutrition to families in need. And according to the United States Department of Agriculture, who oversees these things, SNAP provides food benefits to low-income families to supplement their grocery budget so they can afford the nutritious food essential health and well-being. WIC, which was established as a permanent program in 1974 to safeguard the health of low-income women, infants, and children up to age 5 who are at nutritional risk.
1974, huh? That's only 51 years ago. Women have been giving birth since the dawn of time, and children have always been a part of our most vulnerable population groups. So the need for help has always existed. In other words, this program in particular seems a bit young, no pun intended, in terms of time and establishment. Before this, I wonder how families were able to provide for their children if they were under financial constraints, Corey. Take us back a little so we can get a clear understanding of why these programs exist, the various types, and who is benefiting from them.
For sure. Those are great questions. So during the 1960s, we can start there and kind of jump around on the timeline. A trip down the Mississippi Delta by a Senate subcommittee on employment, manpower, and poverty that consisted of the late Robert Kennedy and others in 1967, coupled with a documentary that was broadcasted the following year called Hunger in America, and it was done by CBS. And that really started painting and shedding light on the actual problem that hunger was being caused to various communities, um, both those affected, Black and Brown communities, also uh, people who are Caucasian, they were affected by it as well. And there's that documentary that I mentioned, which I know that you had a chance to look at. Um, it pained me because it begins with a child, and a child that couldn't be more than a pound and a half. And this child is trying to be resuscitated of sorts, and eventually dies because so many people in that time period just did not have the resources when a woman was pregnant to be able to feed herself and allow her child to gain the nutrients that he or she um, needs. And it began ironically enough with Hispanic people who were just living, working, and trying to do their best. And many of them, I remember, John, I don't know if you recall it, that one young man wanted to eat food at school and he couldn't afford it. And the interview asked him, how much is it? 35 cents. We don't even have coins anymore in this day and age.
That's the beauty of inflation, man. Buy a car for $5 when you go back far enough.
But yeah, right. And it's like to see that this growing teenager is unable to get what he needs for food. Another young lady, they had said she had been detained. Right. And when I say young lady, I'm not talking about a 20-year-old or a 15-year-old.
No,
This
11.
11, right? And she's detained for prostitution. And they ask, why are you doing it? And she says, because I'm hungry. So this need, right, has is not just one-sided. It's not, even in our present times, it's not this invasion of people who wish to just take over and take your jobs and what have you. No, it's that 11-year-old who is generationally suffering from poverty and has no other means that maybe she feels that she can be able to help herself out. But what were some of your takes from what you watched?
Yeah, and it was a really powerful documentary. So if search Hunger in America 1968. I just did a quick search, and I guess between the years of 1943 and 1961, there was no, federal food stamp like program.
Right.
So it really was up to local communities, up to local states, charitable organizations to fill in the gap. So that was the context in which we see some of these images. And yeah, I mean, the opening scenes, in 1968, you're seeing a baby with a skeleton showing through, trying to be resuscitated by a doctor, and on camera, the baby's dying. I mean, this is happening in Texas, and these are images that you would you expect to see in Sudan and other places around the world right now. I mean, this is also um, kind of realizing that it's not so far back that we could consider ourselves a third world country. Um, and also goes to show the importance of programs that unfortunately now have been cut and do not exist, such as USAID, um, which was helping save the lives of tens of thousands of children every year, if not more. Um, and yeah, so the documentary was very powerful. A particular uh, clip stuck out at me, which was the excuses that you hear people saying back then for not supporting solutions to the problem. One was a county commissioner who had been a commissioner for 18 years, and he would blame the no beat dad for not working enough for why the kids are going hungry, and then saying you don't need food in order to concentrate in school. And furthermore, getting a good education isn't really that necessary. It's not necessary to really go to college to be successful. And those were some excuses for not subsidizing food for children in his own community, those communities where they show clips of babies starving. Um, and then there was another uh, white farmer family in the Washington D.C. area, who were poor and who were working, who needed food assistance, but they would refuse food assistance. And uh, their reason was, well, if you ask for help, that just means you're not being responsible. And so they would, you know, reject assistance for themselves and their children because of that sense of pride and that kind of disgust with asking for help from the community, or the community, which is the government, right? Like, this is what your fellow citizens are paying taxes into, and that money can go to support those who are vulnerable. And they were rejecting that for this idea that if you get help, it must be because you're not responsible. And you know I've heard that so often when talking to newly spinal cord injured families in certain parts of the country. When I tell them about vocational rehab, or, there's this government department that'll help you get back to work and other things, and like, no, 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 we don't need any of that. We can handle it ourselves. And this fear of getting help, which in turn just holds everyone down.
Yeah.
So I thought those rationales were striking and sounded very familiar.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, again, it's, again, I think about Tom Wade when we talked about the cuts to the Department of Education. It really is this fear of being stigmatized, coupled with this idea that as a man, you got two hands and 2 feet, as he said, as he said, that you should be up and running and doing what you need to do. But I think that further compounds the issue, because then you're saying this as you're strong and able to work, but if you get into a position where you're no longer able to provide for your family and you need the assistance, don't let your pride get in the way of desperately needing the things you need. And I thought he was from Texas too. Yeah, I believe he's from Texas because he's from a wealthy county
Oh,
that I believe that doesn't receive like food assistance or something to that effect. And he made a remark where he said, if you aren't working and doing what you got to do, you're a bum. And if I want to be a bum, I'd go to Washington because there's plenty of those there, right? Which, obviously there's some innuendo involved, but at the expense of your children, no. But what I thought about with that was this idea of, is there some security in even the color of one's skin, right? Because he's saying that as a Caucasian male. But when they further in the documentary, they go down to Alabama, where this woman's husband was working at one point and earning maybe $3 to $4 a day, harvesting cotton, which had already been barely enough to pick during that time period, and she was on her 10th child. They and the husband had been out of work. He wasn't able to work. I forgot the reason that was cited. And it's like, even in even though they're both poor, their home looked worse in Alabama than his did in Texas. Especially, he's in a town that is in part has money, right? So it's like there's diversity there. We can both be poor, but there still is a little bit more opportunity. And I just wanted to jump back before we start moving on. I'm thinking about Oliver Twist and the labor laws, how that young lady, what she was doing to earn money, and that young man who could not afford the 35 cents to for lunch, he also was trying to work. So trying to balance and go to school, you know, the commissioner was completely wrong there. You know, many of the
Yeah,
doctors during that documentary cited that in infancy, if the brain is not properly nourished, it's going to go underdeveloped, and there oftentimes you
lifelong.
lifelong. It's not you're not going to be helped out. But yeah, man. So in
Hmm.
addition to that, hunger is the byproduct of poverty. And as the government agencies and other groups worked together to address the problem, it became clear it was just happening in an unseen America, just as one might envision in undeveloped countries, like you said before.
Yeah, absolutely. And you may be listening to us talking about this whole documentary. Why are you guys rambling on about this? Well, it's because I think it's so useful looking back at some of these problems that, you know, we can be very proud that have been addressed in any number of ways.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned before, it's the rationale for ignoring these problems that persist. It's the same faulty logic. Maybe the challenge has changed. And I'll kind of talk about that in a little second. But, you know, even if the challenge has changed, the rationale for ignoring the problem can stay the same, and it doesn't make logical sense. And it's a willful ignorance. Um, it's willful ignorance. And that's what we have to protect against and rally against. So in order to fix the problem of hunger, what they had to do was come up with a definition, right? Um, and we all know that, I could say I'm starving, I'm hungry. That's an over exaggeration. We're not actually dealing with food scarcity most of the time. So in the 1980s, under the Reagan administration, a task force was formed to look into whether the issue of hunger was increasing, as well as studying food assistance programs. They developed some definitions for the term hunger. So according to the National Academies, uh, one, a scientific clinical definition in which hunger means the actual physiological effects of extended nutritional deprivations, and two, a definition of hunger as commonly defined relating more to a social phenomenon than medical results, in which hunger is the inability, even occasionally, to obtain adequate food and nourishment.
Yeah, I thought like them looking into it was almost like in part like fear of, oh no, what's going to happen, right? And how can we get ahead of the ball to address it? But again, I think the problems that America has faced, um, whether it's unemployment, whether it's attacks to medical and health insurance, veterans benefits, um, due process, accessible and affordable housing. They're systemic because they have an origin, they have a starting point, and we're still in many ways trying to recover from the starting point. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And just a quick thought before we move on from that is, the interesting that you have these two definitions, right? You have the medical definition, you have the social phenomenon kind of definition, and I wonder how we define hunger today. There are so many instances in which people may be saying, "Oh, I don't feel hungry. I've had a cheeseburger for breakfast. I've had another cheeseburger for lunch. I'm going to have pizza for dinner. I'm fine." Um, but that's not you're not getting the nutrition that you need. You're not getting the nutrients and everything that your body needs to function well and brain development, right? So like we may I'm curious as to see how that definition has evolved to be able to capture, the current situation where there may be plenty of food, it's just not nutritious enough to really to sustain us in the best way, and how
Oh
that's
yeah.
being tracked. But
I,
in other words,
I
we all might be hungry without knowing that we're hungry as a social phenomenon, which is something to think about.
yeah, and when you speak to the social phenomenon, some a lot of it is our own social engineering, right? Like I try my best to avoid over snacking with my kids. And I watch especially my youngest, he will literally say, Daddy, I'm hungry. And I'll say, he'll say, Daddy, I'm hungry. Can I have a snack? Sure. There are some oranges in there, grapes. There are some
That's not
apples.
food.
Yeah, I'm like, nature's candy, right?
Those are plants.
He will do an about face and walk away. And then I have to stop him and say, no, that's not negotiable. you're going to try to hold out for the snack. And as we get into like just talking about the Great Depression, which was one of America's worst time, it gave rise to these things, right? Processed foods, um, inexpensive snacks. That's what kids would get. So it's like, when you're younger, if you found some coins on the ground and stuff like that, you're gonna pocket it to try to go to your local gas station to pick up something sweet to eat, or maybe there's a juice that you really want that you're too far from home to just go get something else. And oftentimes we've done that. So yeah, we mentioned poverty leading to hunger issues, but what came before that was unemployment, and in 1929, the American stock market crashed, sending investors and everyday citizens into an economic spiral. And to break down the stock market crash is just so many people had invested their money and they just could not and eventually pay out those dividends. And investors sold stocks and they couldn't, because they couldn't give it back. It caused people to pull money out of banks, and just the entire crash occurred. And it didn't just affect America, it affected almost every country on the face of the earth. Um, and it lasted for 10 years. And as a result, production of goods slowed down significantly. And through a surplus of crops had been created, there weren't any jobs available to earn an income for those products to be bought. So, like, John, are you?
Wait, so Corey, pause, Corey. So the
Yeah, go
stock
ahead.
market crash was caused by all the poor people demanding too much assistance, right?
Oh no, definitely was not that. No, I mean,
Wait,
we
wait,
all
wait. It was the wealthy people betting too much with all their cash.
essentially,
Okay. All right. Thanks.
essentially.
All right. Just want to put a note in that.
Exactly. And I mean, when you think about it crashing right now, people don't trust it. So what did they do? They went to the banks and took their money out. So now banks don't have a way to invest that money. Even people took out loans from banks that they could not now pay back. So what happens? Banks are closing. People are holding on to their money. Farmers have no kind of farm to table. They have no chain anymore because now manufacturing has gone down because the manufacturers can't pay the wages to employees. And thus, when that surplus was created, that sounds good, but it wasn't like the farmers were trying to distribute that food. A lot of that stuff went to waste. And when you think about the government, like when we get down to talking about SNAP and how it existed versus food stamps, the government only issued surplus foods for certain types of foods. And oftentimes those foods did not include everything that was nutritional. And so, yes, like you said, for lunch, you could have the pizza, you could have this and that and the third, but you're not getting it. And, to my example of my son, he'll come back maybe an hour later and say, I'm hungry. I'm just like, yeah, you ate a honey bun. I allowed you to eat the honey bun, but now you're starving because that processed sugar is not feeding you. But initially, it began under President Herbert Hoover. And that's where you get Hoovervilles and different towns that were set up. There are a lot of things, even in some of the kitchens people would eat, they call it Hoover soup because everything was like a running joke under the former president. But it carried over into Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration. He summed up the condition by saying this: the withered leaves of industrial enterprise lie on every side. Farmers find no markets for their produce. The savings of many years and thousands of families are gone. More important, a host of unemployed citizens face the grim problem of existence, and an equally great number toil with little return. And so to deal with the food scarcity, people ration items, soup kitchens opened up, and bread lines were formed to supplement the shortages. And also this period gave rise, as I said earlier, to processed foods like canned meats, the inexpensive snacks that could be easily mass produced.
Hmm. Wow. So I think there's a bit of irony there that from the time of peril and great starvation, produced processed foods, which there has been a lot of research done that indicates that things like artificial flavoring, preservatives, and labels regarding ingredients that most people can't pronounce, let alone know enough about, could be equally contributing to malnutrition uh, in the current state of affairs. And that's an entirely different topic. Um, but let's talk more about the various types of food assistance programs that currently exist and where they came from.
Sure. So we mentioned SNAP, also known as food stamps. Early in its roots, it began in 1939. So, according to the USDA, the program operated by permitting people on relief to buy orange stamps equal to their normal food expenditures. So, like for every like dollar worth of orange stamps purchased, 50 cents worth of blue stamps were received. And orange stamps could be used to buy any food, but the blue stamps, they could only be used to buy foods determined by the department to be surplus. So this is where you get your dairy products, such as eggs, citrus fruits, prunes, fresh vegetables, flour, beans, and cornmeal. But, going back to that documentary, what I think about, um, it was a Hispanic priest talking to that young man that we've been mentioning. He asked him, "What did you have for breakfast?" He is just like, or what do you have every day? He was just like, just beans and tortillas, beans and tortillas, beans and tortillas. And yes, beans are a great source of protein, but you do need a couple meats into your diet in other forms and what have you.
Or more beans and other vegetables. I mean, you can be a
Yes,
vegetarian, but
true.
and it's important to note also that uh, this stamp program ended after 1943 as conditions improved. So again, between
Yeah.
1943 and 1961, there was no federal program like this. Um, so these programs are to supplement nutrition, as there are some items that SNAP doesn't cover currently, such as cigarettes, alcohol, pet foods, to name a few. Nutrition is a year round need for hundreds of thousands of families. Often, programs that offer reduced school lunch are coupled with things like the SUN program, which gives children the opportunity to keep receiving food benefits to set them on the right path for the future. Outside of the government, there's also nonprofits such as Meals on Wheels that get federal funding and help advocate and assist seniors and people with disabilities by providing them with nutritious meals delivered to their doorsteps. Because, as we know, that there are many unable to leave their homes to go to the grocery store due to age and mobility issues. And in a few weeks, when we speak with some experts, we will go into a more in depth analysis of each of these programs that are offered, especially now that we're in the summer season, to see how effective they are and how they can be made more effective. So, moving on a little bit, let's talk about what's happening with current legislation that may affect these benefits, Corey.
Yeah, so I found that in fiscal year 2023, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, the nation's largest food assistance program, served an average of 42.1 million people per month. It's a lot of people. This represents about 12.6% of the US population. Additionally, more than 49 million people relied on charitable food assistance programs like food banks and pantries in 2022. So, I and you both are keenly aware of the changes in this next big, um, beautiful bill that is being hashed out in the House of Representatives at our nation's capital, that they are planning to make, hundreds of $1 million of cuts to the SNAP program, as well as increasing work requirements. And people have to just kind of strenuously document that, hey, I'm eligible for these assistance programs. And I think that's going to be a bit tough because as you're fighting the hunger gap and trying to work, it's like so many people that I know personally, and even in some of the research that I've done, where you have to be careful. Like, okay, I can't save money because if I have too much in my bank account, they're going to say, hey, you're able to um, pay for these foods, right? But one young woman I saw in Bridgeport during an interview with a major news outlet. They were talking about how, that distance to travel from home to a grocery store so that you can get the foods that you need. People don't have cars, so it's like, no, you can't afford transportation. You can't afford to feed your family, and then like I gotta travel with my kids oftentimes to get to these places. So they are trying to, not within the big beautiful bill. I'm not sure about that, but trying to turn like local grocery stores in urbanized neighborhoods to have more nutritional foods. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, this tax cut and spending cut bill would increase the deficit, by 3.3 children and, result in 17 million Americans losing the healthcare coverage over a decade. So, if it becomes law, critics argue that tens of thousands of families will be unable to afford to buy nutritional food items for the children, and the cost will shift over to the states. Which I remember reading something where Maryland's governor said, that you're not going to be able to handle the influx of people. And if we're talking about numbers, the reconciliation bill will cut SNAP by nearly 300 billion through 2034. And so the CBO, according to the CBO, and some of the demographics that will be affected, most are communities of color, rural areas, people with disabilities, the elderly, immigrant families, and children. And we saw those rural areas being affected by lack of government assistance in that documentary.
Absolutely. I mean, and also to note that some of the big changes to SNAP, besides the spending cuts to fund the program, would also be these additional work requirements, which would essentially add potentially 2 million adults who could be potentially ineligible if they're considered able-bodied adults without dependents. And it's complex because uh, how do you get people who are already struggling financially? They're making below the poverty level in terms of net income. They may be working. They may be taking care of an elderly parent. Um, they may have children, or they may be an uncle or an extended family member who doesn't have children themselves, but they're living in a mixed generation household, and their income is contributing to the family welfare. And all of a sudden, if they're considered an able-bodied adult without dependents, according to some technical definition, then all of a sudden that means that the whole family is impacted. And not only that, but there are all these paper requirements that you need to submit monthly, your pay stubs or whatever documentation is required. And we all know how unreliable websites can be and how things get lost in the mail. And, all of a sudden you not only lose your medical insurance if you're on Medicaid, and there's some other things um, affecting that program in this bill slash maybe soon to be law as well. But it affects so many different aspects of your life. So that's another thing to keep in mind. About 30% of adults who may be potentially seen as able-bodied adults without dependents are actually already working, but may be found ineligible simply because they can't comply with the paperwork for one reason or another.
Yeah, and we speaking on the eligibility requirements when we talk about work. I believe I saw a report that this month has been the first time in 2 years that the number of jobs have decreased, right? And so, if we're talking about opportunities to work versus the proverbial someone's lazy sitting in the basement not doing anything kind of mindset, or why do you need education, as the commissioner in the documentaries we spoke about, if jobs aren't there, then what is supposed to be the substitute? Is it that, in their view, people who believe that it's a bunch of people freeloading on the system, is it their view that yes, you're able-bodied, you can go out to work, and there's a job for you, or do they just think that people just don't have any opportunity, especially when it comes down to just having the income to afford groceries in this day and age, right? This is not 20 cents for a carton of eggs or something like that. We don't live in that time period. We live in a time period where just the essentials are so much more than the average person can really afford, and it can only go grocery shopping. They would have to probably go grocery shopping more like weekly as opposed to like 2 weeks, get a surplus build up their coffers and stuff like that. And the reality is, it's just not that way. I think people genuinely speaking want to work. They don't want to just fall on the system, but they're in dire straits.
Yeah, I mean, another important thing that's at risk here is, SNAP benefits up until this point, they get updated, I think every year or so, according to inflation. So it keeps up with inflation. As you said, like back in the day, like 35 cents might get you a meal. That's today, that's like what, $6? Um, and if that's fast food, um, so updating the SNAP benefits make it possible for people to afford nutritional food as opposed to fast food. And if that
Right.
stops, that's just basically forcing people into what they can afford, and that's not going to be the healthiest food options out there. Um,
Yeah.
and so again, like just to harken back, like any justification that kind of goes along the lines of, well, it's the father's fault, it's the adult's fault for not working hard enough. That's why the food should go. That's why the children should go hungry. Um, it just smacks of terrible assumptions. First of all, and second of all, like how are we valuing our fellow neighbor? I'm sorry, you're not worth feeding or helping getting a good meal because of who your father is, like, or
Mhm.
or the situation where you're growing up. And I look forward, Corey, to also diving into the importance of programs like this, but also like the other root causes. Like, we're going to be discussing in more detail SNAP and WIC and all these things, but like, what's the world in which these are no longer needed, right? Like, what do we need in order to get beyond these temporary programs? Because they are kind of long-term band-aids, right? Um, there, it would be great to have a country or in a world in which you don't need food assistance because everyone has a job, everyone has housing, everyone has food security, everyone has access to a good grocery store, and you can get good, wholesome vegetables and fruits without having to turn to more processed options because that's all you can pay for. Um,
Yeah. And I think you said something that just reminds me about last month. This idea of accessible design. It doesn't include just the way that you structure or build a home so that occupants with disabilities or mobility issues have access to the community. But accessible design has to include where you put your grocery stores at, food supply um, entities and organizations, so that when calamity strikes or something occurs, people don't have to be so reliant just on like a nonprofit to fill in those gaps in the spaces, but that um, there are companies who say that, listen, there's a need for food in this neighborhood because the average person has to travel this distance between their home by public transportation in order to get food. I remember seeing another documentary some years ago where I think it was a town in West Virginia, and they had like a Walmart in that town. And when that Walmart closed, they were reduced to poverty. Unemployment rose
Mm.
because many people in the community worked there. I'm not too sure as to why the Walmart closed, but you just see the effects of when that access is decreased. And this is a town of, predominantly Caucasian people. So it doesn't just affect one marginalized group. It's going to affect everybody, and we need to really keep that in mind as we go forward. But just how that works and how we can fix it. Sometimes, right now we just have more questions, and I can't wait to speak to those experts about it.
Absolutely, Corey. And just to let everyone know before we close that if you are living with a disability like a spinal cord injury and you need, you think you qualify and you need help with food assistance, just go to spinalpedia.com and request peer mentoring, and we can help you navigate the system. More Than Walking is partnered with Spinalpedia to provide that one-on-one assistance and system navigation of all different types of benefit programs. Um, so, well, Corey, I look forward to this month. So everyone stay tuned in and sign up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com to learn about the topic we will cover next, which is food assistance, and how you can participate. Also, like, comment, and subscribe to our More Than Walking YouTube channel, and watch each podcast and click that notification bell so you are alerted when new episodes drop. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for More Than Walking or Super Adaptables.
And when you do follow us, please remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else,
Keep adapting.